It takes a moment. Oh, there we go. Okay. And we're back on another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, where we have a casual and informal discussion about Star Trek, Star Trek The Next Generation specifically today. And we're going to talk about the episode Clues. And I'm so pleased to have on our channel today a new member of the crew, and it's Rob Chapman, I think, right?
Yep, that's right.
Also known as Trekkie Rob.
Yep, that's correct.
And then of course Sean is here. Yay! Hi, Sean. From
Hey.
Trek on the Tube. Rob, welcome to the show. We're really pleased to have you. I understand from our discussions offline that you're going to give a crack at the episode summary today, right?
I'll try.
Yeah, nice. Nice.
You can fill in the blanks if I miss any.
We'll help you out for sure. What I'd like to know, because we kind of do this for every new guest, is if you don't mind taking a few minutes to start out by first telling us who you are, about yourself. Feel free to plug any ventures that you're doing, especially the Trek Book Club, and then tell us about your Star Trek story, whatever that may be.
Okay, so so I'm Rob Chapman. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Trekkie Rob. So how did I get into Star Trek? Probably when I was about maybe 12, 13. And so I started with Deep Space Nine and Voyager, kind of running concurrently. And I used to always watch them with my dad. We'd sit down and watch an episode and talk about it. And yeah, I remember at the time my stepmom absolutely despised it. So we used to constantly talk about it. So yeah, it was quite nice that me and my dad had that. We could sit down and do that together.
To interrupt real quick, it's kind of cool that you started with Deep Space Nine, and I'll have a lot of questions about that later, but go on. Sorry, I think that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I had seen a few episodes here and there of TOS and TNG, but I properly started. I mean, I wasn't really paying attention to them. I properly started with Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and they're the two that I've watched all the way through about 10 times.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the others not so much. Yeah, so yeah, and then after I watched DS9 and Voyager and some of the movies for a few years, and then I kind of lost interest. I think growing up doing in the UK, my exams, my GCSEs, my A levels, and then go to university, I kind of lost touch with Star Trek. And then in the last few years, I've got back into it. There's been some great podcasts, both of yours, obviously, and things like Trek FM, and lots of other podcasts and YouTube channels that have got me back into it. So yeah,
that's very cool. When I first decided to do a podcast, my friend Scott, who's really into podcasts, kind of interested me in it. And I noticed it's such a vibrant landscape. I can't possibly keep up with all the shows, but I try every now and then. I definitely try and I listen, and those were definitely some good ones that you mentioned there. Regarding the Deep Space Nine thing, so a lot of people that Deep Space Nine is probably the best Star Trek series out there, and certainly I have a show called Drunk Space Nine, where that's part of our whole mission, is that we're trying to prove drunkenly that Star Trek Deep Space Nine is not just the best Star Trek series, but the best TV series, period. And Sean's probably going to take umbrage to that, but still, that's one of our missions on Drunk Space Nine.
Okay.
After watching Deep Space Nine, when you watched TNG and TOS, how did those shows rank, compared to DS9? And where do you rank, just, real quick, you don't have to think too much about it, but where do you rank your Star Trek series, from, best to worst?
Yeah, I always say this when people ask. It depends whether you're talking about best or favorite, because I distinguish between them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So your favorite is what I'd like to know then. First.
So my favorite
and then your best.
So my favorite, probably controversially, is Voyager, because that's the one I've watched the most, I grew up with. But the best, is without a doubt, is DS9. For
What
me,
is your
anyway.
show?
For me.
What's your? I don't remember.
So I'm kind of the same as Rob here. I do best and favorites because they're very different. There's certain music that I love, but that is terrible. So so I make a distinction between both. The best, I think, Star Trek television series that exists is the original series because of the legacy that it created and in the time it was created in. Um, but my favorite is Voyager, hands down.
I
I
think
think
if I
it's yeah, no, I think Voyager is the closest to the original series, but it's modern. And I know it has problems and the Kazons and what have you, but it's fine. I love it.
I think it's clear that every Star Trek series has its
Oh
problems,
yeah,
and
definitely.
and and so yeah, it's I don't think it matters, but I like that idea of best and favorite. So if I had to redo that, I would say that I can now, like, because I used to kind of feel like bad about, because I love Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's like my favorite show, and I used to feel bad that I actually do think that DS9's writing and production and everything is better. So I would always kind of just like be like, oh yeah. It's like, but now I like that. So my favorite show is TNG. The best show is DS9. So I can kind of feel better about like that now. Thank you.
Scapegoat, isn't it?
It's good. Actually, because like humans are not just black and white, right? And neither are thoughts or feelings. So I think that's a better way to kind of express ourselves even more accurately. So you guys just enlightened me today. Very nice. Well, so let's get right to clues, Rob. Let's go for the episode, what the episode summary is, and let's carry on our discussion.
I'll do my best. I wrote down a few notes. So basically, so Picard starts by explaining that the crew are having some downtime, or more than they usually do, and you've got Worf, Troy, Riker, and Geordi. They're taking some sort of martial arts class. Dr. Crusher's conducting some sort of botanical experiment. And what I really like is Picard and Dynan enjoying the Dixon Hill program on the holodeck. That's kind of cool. And then Data calls in, tells them that he's detected this particular star and there's an M-class planet. So Picard tells them to go investigate. And then en route, the Enterprise encounters a wormhole, is thrown a fair distance away from their previous position. And the wormhole causes the entire crew, except Data, to fall unconscious. And the crew wakes up, and Data tells them that they were unconscious for about 30 seconds. And then throughout the episode, the crew start to notice, and it's the crew minus Data, start to notice strange occurrences. So Dr. Crusher, who was conducting this botanical experiment, notices that the moss that she was growing, which she started growing just before they went into the wormhole, has suddenly experienced 24 hours worth of growth. Worf has, I think, a broken wrist, and he doesn't know how that's happened. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones.
There was what was it? The time
I know when oh yes, that's right. Yes, they detect some sort of time difference with one of the crew members' transporter logs or something.
And some Locklear. I don't know why I remember her. Lachlan.
Yeah, that's right. And they begin to note. I think Data. They question Data about some of the strange occurrences or some of the things that have happened, and he gives a reason for it. And basically, then Picard dismisses him from the conference room, and basically the rest of the crew don't believe what he's saying, and it seems to be either covering something up or lying, and then the crew begin to investigate, and eventually they find out that Data's hiding something. He's not being completely truthful, and can't remember if I might be skipping quite a bit here, but eventually we discover that there's this alien species that one of them takes over Troy's body, and basically they try to they're kind of xenophobic, so they try to knock out the crew, and send the Enterprise away, so because they don't like outsiders. But it didn't work, obviously, because Data wasn't affected by it. And so, because it didn't work, I think Picard tells Data that he has to. I think he has to. They have to do it again, basically.
Right.
And Data has to. He orders Data to lie to him. If he asks what happened.
Right, he had ordered it before, but because of all the clues left behind,
that's right. Hence the name.
Right, and so now, yeah, that was the little. I just want to insert that little piece, but now he orders him again.
Yeah, no. Yes. Yeah. So, and then because all these clues are left behind, the crew find out what's happened, and the xenophobic race, I think they're called the Paxons.
Yeah, the Paxons.
They're trying to get the Enterprise to go away because of all these clues left. The Enterprise don't go away, so they have to do it all over again. And
but
eventually,
the Paxons decide that humans are interesting enough to get a second chance because they just wanted to kill everyone, and
they are worthy.
They are worthy of a second chance. We are worthy of a second chance.
Yeah, we're worthy in the 24th century. Are we worthy now?
I don't know if we would be worthy.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, and so then seemingly Data actually pulls it off at the end.
Yes.
And they what do? They dispatch a hazard beacon or something like that.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And then Bob's your uncle. Very good.
Probably missed out loads in that summary, but
well, I think there's if you gave a proper summary, it would be 15 minutes long. So I'm glad that you just kind of got to the gist of it. So no, most excellent. You did it much better than I do. But not as good as Sean.
Well, I've only done it once.
No, I know, I'm teasing. I like to tease you about it because Sean took a while to want to do it, and you're like, yeah, I'll do it first time. So I'm really excited. So yeah,
I have to tippy toe into things like that. I don't know.
Great summary. I like that you mentioned the martial arts scene. I didn't realize this. But it's actually I think it's Tai Chi in actuality, but what it's supposed to be in universe is Mokbara, which is a form. It's like Tai Chi but for Klingons. So that's why Worf is leading the class, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first time we see the Mokbara on screen. We do see it again, it comes up over and over again. It's like a leisure activity that we see a few times, like fencing. We see Picard fencing and things like that. So
interesting that they're wearing human robes rather than a more traditional Klingon outfit.
Right. I wonder if
is it Starfleet
it's because he's a well, I wonder if he's just chosen a very general something comfortable that everyone would like, because maybe Klingon attire wouldn't be as comfortable.
Yeah, if it's got spikes and whatever.
Maybe Mokbara is actually painful and they've kind of toned it down. Who knows? Who knows? Those are things that future writers can certainly do. In fact, it'd be neat to have seen Klingons doing Mokbara on Star Trek Discovery, but perhaps we'll see that in a future episode. Yeah. So what'd you guys think of the episode? Basically, is it one that you liked, or do you remember watching it before this rewatch or anything like that?
I'd completely forgotten it. It was while watching a new episode. I'm sure I had seen it at least once before, but I had no recollection of it whatsoever. I quite liked it. I mean, it wasn't the best TNG episode, but it was good. I like the mystery and the fact that the crew had to, work some things out, and the fact that it wasn't just a plain mystery, that Data was clearly hiding something, and we, the audience, didn't know what was happening either. So we feel just like the crew do, like we've been, we're out of the loop. So that was quite cool. But I felt like there are other episodes that are fairly similar that have done it a bit better. So there was the whole idea of Data lying to the crew to protect them. That was that instantly made me think of the Voyager episode Latent Image, where they have to lie to the Doctor to protect his program because I think his actions had ended up resulting in the deaths of some crewmen.
Oh, neat!
Was that late in the image?
You just gave me a spoiler for Voyager. Yes.
Wait, be careful because that's a big moment for the Doctor. But I see what you mean.
Okay.
In comparison, that moment in Voyager, the depth, and how it affects the Doctor is similar to what we're talking about with Data here, but it is much more important in Voyager. To the character.
Yeah,
I found it really great.
So this could be a trial run. It is TNG. It came out before.
Yeah. Well, the theme isn't like something I don't even like. I can't specifically name another example, but I think I've seen this kind of style of story on other shows where basically your commanding officer or friend or whatever is compelling you to secrecy, about something that could potentially, hurt your many people, not just one person. So it's like it's a very the good of the many outweigh the good of the few or the one type of scenario, and it's I think that like while it's not like extraordinary in terms of like something that hasn't been done before, I think the way that TNG did it in this episode for me was really great, and it only was great because of Brent Spiner, Patrick Stewart, like all the performances in this episode is what I was really glued to. Like Sean just tweeted like before we got on about the look that Data gives to Captain Picard in the scene where Picard is confronting him and asking him very direct questions about like like why are you fabricating this information, and Data's just like kind of looking straight up at him like completely deadpan, and it's just like so
very emotional in this episode. He's almost like, because he smiles at the end.
I
tries.
He attempts to smile.
He feels very Lore in this episode. I mean, I know it's the same actor and Brent Spiner. I mean, he doesn't need to go that far to change from Lore and Data,
right?
But it did feel a little Lore in this episode with the hiding
and the lying. It's like Data does have to, I think, tap it. It's extraordinary. I think Brent Spiner is a brilliant performer, and I don't know if he does these things consciously or not. We don't have access to him, unfortunately, to ask him, so we can only like kind of guess at it. But just based on what I've seen so far with his performances, first of all, I don't think this episode could have worked in much earlier seasons because we didn't know all these characters, especially Data, as well as we do now. But like I think part of its success is that by this point in season 4, the crew really, because Picard has to like at some point he has to come to the conclusion that like, but he's lying to protect the crew for some reason, like and if it was an earlier season, I don't know if he would have had that trust in Data quite as deeply as he does in this episode. But yeah, I just think that Brent Spiner did tap into a little bit of what he taps into to play Lore. But just enough, because I never lost faith in Data. Like I was trying to recall when I first saw this episode and I didn't know the answer to the mystery. I was like, no, Data can't be guilty. Like nothing's wrong with Data. Like at this point, I was in the same kind of shoes as Picard as an audience member, because I saw enough of Data to know that like something bigger was up, and I did like the reveal because it does fit into the the overall mantra of strange new worlds and new civilizations. And these Paxtons are very interesting. I thought like imagine what it's like to be a species that has gone, out of their way to be completely unknown. And whenever they're found out, they just like erase your memory and throw you several light years away. So you'd think just like a wormhole, it's quite brilliant, I think. Like
pretty disappointed we don't see more of them, actually, because I mean we see that kind of the energy cloud or whatever it is in space, and then we see kind of like a green luminescence enter Deanna Troi, but and that's something that they do very often, specifically on TNG, where like a non-corporeal being will take control of someone on the crew. Suppose that has the actor do something different, and they don't need to recast or do any CG, just voice modifying and what have you. But I think it would have been nice to actually see these beings, like to see their form or to see what they can do, how their ship is in more detail. Maybe it is just budget.
We're
Right.
talking about the voice modification. Did I don't know if either of you seen Stargate SG-1?
Yes, it's like
A long time ago.
I have.
It just
It's
immediately
like old, right? Like
the gold. As soon as she starts talking, it just sounds like a gold.
I am Uber Counselor Troy. I am going to destroy all of you now. Marina Sirtis did the voice, and they just modified her voice, or if they actually got another voice actor to portray it.
Yeah, no,
so
it does sound like her, but just heavily modified.
Yeah.
Don't fuck
Again,
with me, Worf. Just kidding, sorry.
I don't want to. So, have you not seen much of Voyager?
So going back to Voyager, when Voyager first aired, I saw the whole first season. I bought season 1 through 3 on DVD, but of course now you can see it on Netflix, so I don't have to buy the rest of the seasons. And I also subscribe to CBS All Access. So I've only made it as far as season 3, where I've watched it consecutively, but anytime it's been on television, I've watched it. So I actually have seen like
some major episodes.
Yeah, and I've actually seen the ending, so I know, of course, that what happens, like how they get home, and like Barclay and Troy are also part of that whole thing.
I was just going to talk about, and again, another Voyager episode that a little bits of this kind of reminded me of, but I didn't want to spoil it too much if you hadn't seen.
No, go ahead. No, it's fine.
It's a really good episode. It's where at the beginning of the episode we see the Doctor and Janeway in a shuttle, and then it kind of cuts back to Voyager, and Janeway comes back. And then later on in the episode, we find basically the crew's Janeway ends up using a hyperspray on Chakotay, and she you basically find out it's the Doctor. He's taking on other crew members' forms.
That Doctor,
and you wonder at the time, you don't know why. You want like with Data, you're wondering why is he lying, and in this episode, you're wondering why is the Doctor taking on other crew members' forms. And when the crew are getting close to discovering that he's in disguise as other crew members, he knocks them unconscious or uses the hyperspray. Part of that episode, it's called Renaissance Man. It's quite late.
Oh, okay.
I think it's one of the last couple of episodes of last season.
I might have to watch those. I kind of like in After Trek. You watch Star Trek Discovery, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely.
In After Trek, how they give you the homework assignments like of episodes they think that like are relevant somehow. So that's my homework assignment, is to watch those 2 episodes of Voyager.
Cadets training or something.
It's totally cadets training. I wonder, what would you? If you were captain of the Enterprise and Data was acting suspicious, do you think it was believable how everyone on the crew kind of treated the whole situation, or is there something you might have done differently in that situation? Sir?
That's tough, actually.
Yeah, that is tough.
Because we're not captains, but to be honest, I don't like Data as a crew member. Like if I were captain, I wouldn't like having Data on board. I know there's plenty of advantages to having an android with his capacities, but I think he's very dangerous. He does things sometimes just automatically because he thinks he can do it faster. He can do this and he can save the ship, but then he doesn't talk to anyone about it, just executes it. I don't know. He's pretty dangerous.
So Data's like a nuisance to you. Are you familiar with the 3 laws of robotics?
Yes, but
them to a T. I don't think he would hurt like a human. Like I don't think he would actually put.
But then that's wrong, because he would put Deanna Troi. Fine, she's Betazoid, but he would put her in danger just to save the crew and the ship.
But that fits in with the law of robotics, because
only to save another.
The logical choice would be to save more humans than one human. You know what I mean? So it's like
if he's forced to, he has to save this group because there's more in that group. Yeah.
it's yeah, I think like and actually like as a human there was a really cool experiment that someone on YouTube did, which I objected to actually because like had I been one of the people in this experiment, I would have been so traumatized by it. But they wanted to know if you ask someone like, you know, if you have a train track, right, and it splits in two, and on one side of the train, and you control the lever of which way the train goes, right?
I
Now
remember
once
something like that.
train track there's only one worker, and on the other train track there's like 20 workers, right? So you know, most people will say, yeah, of course I'm going to switch. When you ask them hypothetically, they'll say I'm going to switch the track so that it likely hits the one person, not the 20 people, right? And then you know, so that's like the most common answer, like pretty much like 100% of people will say that. But then when you there's no way to test this hypothesis or this theory, because you by putting someone in that situation, even in a testing environment, it can cause severe psychological person to have to make that decision. You know what I mean? So the guy who the guy who did the experiment went to an ethics board, got permission to do it, and because they needed to like make sure they had like counselors on site. You know, there was Deanna Troy and everything like that. And I was watching, I couldn't watch the rest of the video because watching the people who were going through the experiment having to like make this decision, and many of them just froze, like they didn't know what to do, so they just let the train keep going on its course, like whatever it was going to be, and they didn't switch it to the one person. So I just got traumatized watching it. So I can just imagine being in Data's position, like, and he at least he doesn't have the benefit of emotions, you know what I mean? Because I think our emotions are what get us to freeze and be paralyzed and all that stuff, as we talked about how when he turns his emotion chip, that's essentially what happens to him in Generations. But for Data, I think it's like, you know, he's making the logical choice in that situation.
I was waiting.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was waiting in that moment where Picard asks him about, you know, would you put your friend and colleague in harm's way, and he says, if it means this, you know, the safety of the whole crew. I was waiting for someone to say that, you know, the needs of the many. Great, but yeah, it didn't come.
It's the closest we got to it.
It is essentially it's the same thing.
yeah.
No, I was just gonna build off what you were talking about. That was, I mean, going on a tangent here, but there's a manga called Monster, where essentially this doctor working in a hospital finds himself in a situation where two patients come in. So one is the mayor of the city, and if he saves the mayor's life, then the mayor will give a big grant to the hospital, and everyone will get, you know, a raise, and everything will be perfect. But there's also a child that comes in at that point. And so his boss tells him, like the director of the hospital says, save the mayor. This kid that, like, so the kid essentially just lost, both his parents died and his sister as well, and he's the lone survivor. And he says that kid's broken anyway, so just let him go and save the mayor. And so the doctor doesn't. He says, screw the mayor, and he saves the kid. And then he has to quit his job and what have you. And the story is essentially, that's the prologue. And the story picks up, 20 years later or something. That kid has become like a psychopath serial killer.
Oh, jeez.
And the whole story is about how he has to deal with that, and how he somehow feels obligated to go and stop that kid because he's responsible.
That's a compelling story. That's very
anyway.
Cool.
Anyway, it made me think of that. The whole train example.
I like that the Enterprise. I like that throughout the seasons, and it feels especially somehow more of an emphasis this season, where we get to see things. So what happens when the exciting stuff isn't happening? You know what I mean? And so, like, when the episode begins, here we get to see like kind of glimpses of what people do in downtime, and you know, we've also even seen like little other tidbits, like, for example, there's a night shift and a day shift, and you know, the lighting gets dimmer, and so now we can tell, like, if we're watching an episode and the lights are dimmer, it's probably the night shift. You know, it's something obvious, but it's like nice to have these kind of reveals on screen. what were some reveals on screen about like this kind of behind the scenes on the Enterprise type stuff that you really liked, if there was anything at all that you liked from that aspect of it? I'll tell you mine.
Yeah, go on.
I liked the doctor running experiments with her little hobby. What was it?
Ethnobiology, was it? Ethnobotany. That's
Ethnobiology. Ethnobotanist, which I didn't bother to look up, so I have no idea what an ethnobotanist.
I did.
Oh, good, nice.
Diomedian scarlet moss is what she's trying to grow.
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's the study of plants and humans and how they interact, or something along those lines.
Oh, wow, that's
someone could be like, no, that's not it. But something along those
lines. We never find out whatever, I don't think, because I did look that up on Memory Alpha. There's only this reference to it is the Demidian scarlet moss. So I was like hoping that like I wasn't hoping this ever before. I just started hoping this now when I saw this episode this time. But I was like, oh, it would have been cool if they had like a future episode where we went to Demidia and saw the scarlet moss and like, you know, something like that. But alas, it did not happen. Did it happen in Voyager?
The universe is a big place. So.
Tecate, why is there Demidian moss in the Delta Quadrant? Is it the Delta Quadrant they're in? Yeah, they're the Delta Quadrant.
I mean, yeah, it's fun to see what they're doing in their downtime. But once the investigation starts, I like seeing characters interact that we never really seen before. Beverly goes to see O'Brien in the transporter room, and those aren't really characters that you see interact. And I mean, yeah, sure, it lasts 20 seconds. She says, you know, you need to give me data on whoever transported last, and he says, okay, and that's it. But I don't know, it's fun to see all of these people, like the hustle and bustle of everyone trying to do their own part of the investigation. It's not just the bridge crew with Picard sitting down saying, I need this information or that information. It's just, you see everyone doing their thing. I like that. I also found that they push Data around a bit. So once they start suspecting him, they tell him to get out of the room and send him to engineering.
Oh, yeah.
That's fine, I guess. But then Geordi gets back to engineering and he says, no, you go to bridge. It's like, okay.
But wouldn't Data be a bit suspicious at that? You know, I think you can leave the room now. We're all going to stay here.
Yeah, I think Data is suspicious because the way he says, like, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but he's like, as you wish, Captain. Like, it's kind of like different than like his normal, like, yes, sir, or whatever, you know. And me in this episode is I noticed how much Picard says make it so. He said it like 5 times in this episode. Like pretty much any decision now it's like make it so. You know, it's like an interesting development here in the Picard character. And I don't know if it's like every episode, but I'm now going to be paying attention to how many make it so's are. I bet there's got to be a person out there who counted all the make it so's in every episode.
There's got to be. There's got to be a Star Trek drinking game where that's one of the.
That's one of the rules.
I'm fairly sure get you quite drunk quite quickly.
The thing that Picard is doing in his downtime is, of course, he's engaged in a Dixon Hill mystery, and those are always fun. And I was compelled to look up one of the the character that gets shot in the holodeck.
Oh no, okay.
What's that? Oh,
Gloria.
Gloria. First of all, it's kind of, I do have to say, as an aside, I have to say that it seems, I know this is like, what is it, like the 1920s and 1930s, right? It just seems so odd to me that people ever spoke that way. You know what I mean? Like, I realize that I realize that it's, of course, a fetishized version of the slang of the time, because like these noir films and noir books are obviously not, taking into account like what everyone kind of spoke with, but there was definitely a good segment of society that like spoke with that accent and that slang. And it's like, you think of Chicago and New York of that, of that era, but the guy says, what do I look like, a jamoke? And I was like, what the heck's a jamoke?
Yeah, I thought that.
So I looked it up, and it goes, appearing at the end of the 19th century as a blend of Java plus mocha, By the 1920s, it became slang for someone who lacked mental abilities beyond that of a cup of coffee.
Okay.
Probably
very
probably
specific
influenced by Moke. And then in the 1960s, it became, which is later, it began to be used as slang for male genitalia.
Why not? I mean,
So yeah, a jamoke. So now I have a new word in my vocabulary, and so from now, anytime someone is condescending, I'm gonna say, "What do I look like? A jamoke?" This
I
is
love
what
in
I
that-
do for fun.
in that holodeck scene. I love the interaction between Guinan and Dixon Hill's secretary. It's so funny.
Totally. Whoopi Goldberg gets to for once play up her comedic side here, and
Yeah.
of course she's a genius when it comes to timing and everything, and I think she like really did a good job of pulling off this like confused but holodeck participant. And I like how when Captain Picard's called away, he's like, "Well, Guinan, you can continue if you like," and she's like, "Nah, that's okay." This is already a little too much for me.
yeah, she did go to the holodeck to be polite. You can sense that because she gets out of there really quick. I mean, she doesn't stay.
I think I might be done with it too. I mean, like someone gets killed like within like the first few, minutes of me arriving in the holodeck, and it's
Yeah, I mean, my ideal holodeck program would probably just be like a beach, and I'd just go and lie down. I mean, that's probably what I'll do, especially if this is your only downtime in a long time.
Oh no! See, I think I'd do something much more out there. But yeah, you're right. If you're
You'd go skydiving and turn off the safety protocols or something, but
yeah, maybe not that far. I wouldn't go that far.
we all know Jordy.
I'd like, yeah, I was getting better than ask you, like, who would you take on the holodeck? Is he take Skynet? That would be my first choice. Yeah.
What was that? What was I think the holodeck's an interesting thing, and we're kind of heading into that. We're headed more towards the Ready Player One. It's an interesting movie coming soon kind of direction, I think, where it's going to be more video gameized or whatever, and more of like we'll definitely get this virtual reality stuff with goggles and stuff way before we get a holodeck. But I think when we do get a holodeck, it's going to be really weird and interesting for humanity when that point. I don't think it's going to be very soon, because like holographic technology today is just like so rudimentary when you compare it to what we've imagined it could be like in our science fiction. Where do you stand, Rob, on this kind of like idea of how Discovery seems to be using a lot more holograms than what we are used to seeing in that era of Star Trek from an in-universe standpoint?
I don't have a problem with it. I think it's an interesting. It's interesting to see that a different style of communication. I mean, I can see how some people might have issues with it, because I guess we don't really see that until a lot later, in terms of canon. But I don't have a problem with it. I think it's kind of cool. It's interesting.
I think it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I can see why some people would think that.
But you see, okay, it doesn't make sense canon-wise, yes, because we don't see that until, DS9, and they say it's new. Fair enough. But I think it doesn't make sense in the way that, okay, so a holographic representation of Captain X appears on your bridge. What are they seeing on their bridge? Are they seeing you? Are they seeing Burnham in her chair, just sitting there, or are they seeing a representation of the bridge? It doesn't make sense both ways.
I know.
And then they always
I was thinking of the DS9 episodes where I think in some of those holographic communications, you see one of the captains that Cisco's talking to actually pushing buttons, but you can't see what he's pressing. So I get what you mean. It is a bit weird.
And then, in that sarcophagus ship, Giorgio just appears in the middle of the ship. But so we see it only from one side, but then we don't see it from the other side. I think it doesn't work.
I think
I can't wrap my head around how the technology would work. I agree that having view screens sometimes was really bad because they wouldn't show the bridge of the other ship. They would have these awkward close-ups of the aliens, just because they didn't have a sit. So they put the actor in front of a blue screen or in front of just a carpet and then filmed them. But it makes more sense to me.
I think as far as the explanation behind how the technology works, like, since there hasn't been anything, like, as far as I'm aware, nothing official's come out of the licensors like CBS or whatnot, so like we all have to kind of speculate. I was talking to a friend who's a physicist, and what do you call people that build robots? Robotics expert, maybe? I don't know.
An engineer, maybe? But...
Yeah,
an engineer. Thank you. He's an engineer. And I actually asked him, I was like, because we were kind of debating about this, and he mentioned that, like, a computer as advanced, even as advanced as the ones that you see in TOS era, you have to kind of imagine that there's like a virtual subroutine or a program that handles just audiovisual functions on the ship. So, like, for example, in the scenes where the admiral is aboard, and he actually turns around and talks to Burnham in that scene, what is he seeing on his end? Well, on his end, he's probably seeing two holograms, one of Captain Giorgio and one of Burnham. So they're physically within a proximity around him. Anyone that steps within that proximity will appear as a hologram to him as well. So Burnham, like, when she enters the room, she also enters his holographic field. So that's the way that he kind of explained it, and I kind of like,
But that makes sense for that scene specifically, and that's a huge problem that Discovery has.
That's the only
they have explanations.
Yeah, that's the only scene that we talked about.
For one scene.
Yeah. But like later on, like, for example, one thing that's baffling to me, I haven't asked my friend about this, but I can't think of a reason why, but Sarek is somehow able to sit on Burnham's furniture. So like the Sarek hologram in that later in that scene, he just sits down on her furniture, and so
it looks cool.
Yeah, it just looks cool. So
it just looks
there's
cool.
There's a little bit of that. But going back to Star Trek.
I don't think. I know this is a silly thing to say because we're all a bit nerdy, and we get caught up on nerdy little things like that. But I don't think we're meant to think that hard about it. But yeah, we do. We can't help it.
I think the problem is that, like, before, it seems that Star Trek did make you think hard about those things, and I think if you're conditioned to do that, because like, for example, and you get a lot of answers in the previous Star Trek series, like you get like the technological what is going on there, and then later on someone usually delivers like some kind of like explanation within the show for you, so there aren't a lot of mysteries. So I think that that's the one thing that I think different about Discovery, is that you're right, they are saying, like, we're shifting the focus away from these kind of like things that you're used to seeing on Star Trek, because like we don't see really a lot of great shots of ships either, like we don't really know a lot about a lot of details about like the ships that we see and things like that. So the focus here is a lot on just the characters, the character development, and then the overarching story. So I do agree with you that like Discovery's saying basically, we don't care what you think about that. Focus on the story, guys.
Make it look cool.
Make it so.
Going back to the episode. Did you spot when Data calls Picard in the holodeck? Did you notice that Data was perching with one leg like Riker does? I just thought that was...
That's right, I did.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
That was kind of strange. It's true. He was
little Data homage to Riker.
He is trying to emulate like what he admires about all the crew members. So I imagine that, like, yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. And that's a Jonathan Frakes kind of stamp on the show is interesting. Like, one thing that I always noticed when I was a kid, when I was first watching it, is that a lot of times Riker's just behind Picard and he's staring right at some point on the back of his head like all the time. He's just always like staring. Next time you watch, kind of notice where Riker stares at Picard when he's giving a monologue or something like that. What was I going to say? The second time around, when they kind of fix everything and go about their way, and like they leave the emergency beacon and things like that, I wonder like if there were any follow-ups to the Paxons, like as you said, Sean, that you wanted to see more of them. But it'd be curious if like they were so intrigued by the humans that they actually kind of, maybe it would have been neat if like a future story showed that the Paxons actually were inspired by like not just the ingenuity of the humans, like, and not the humans, just humans, but just the Federation, I should say. I'm being very human centric here, but not just the ingenuity that they showed, but the willingness to respect the willingness to respect their desire to be xenophobes. Like, I think if they'd encountered the Klingons or perhaps the Romulans, the whole thing might have gone completely differently. It would have probably played out just as Picard suggested. Like I feel like the Paxtons would have been forced to destroy the other vessel, and then more would have come to see what's going on, and then that's it. It's over. Like how many other ships could the Paxtons like trick that way or fend off, and so on and so forth. So it'd be neat if there was like a follow-up story or something like that where the Paxtons actually like realize, hey, maybe we don't need to be xenophobic. There's good people out there. And that's kind of like one thing that I liked that I don't know that ever comes to pass. I guess we could look it up, later on Memory Beta or something like that. They usually do the books, but way into books. So we didn't really talk about your book club. Can you tell us more about the Trek book club, and like, in your encounter so far, have you been reading any TNG novels, or tell us some more about it?
So yeah, it's a seamless link, by the way, seamless. No one noticed. Yeah, basically, I was kind of inspired because I won a competition on Trek FM and went on one of their roundtable discussions, and it was all about Star Trek books and literature. And I'd only read one. Well, I say read. It was an audiobook, so heard one audiobook at that point, and it was a Voyager novel. So I thought, you know what? I've watched most of the series. I've watched all the films. Kind of exhausted almost my what there is of Star Trek, so I'll try the novels. So I've only read 6 or 7 so far, so I'm a relative to the world of Star Trek books. But yeah, so I started the Trek book club to try and get people involved, whether they're newcomers to Star Trek literature or they've read loads and loads of novels, to get us together. And basically, so what we do is read every month. We read a Star Trek book, and then we come together on Twitter and discuss it. What we liked about it, what we didn't like, what happened, just analyze it. Kind of like what we're doing with this episode.
Do you guys have a YouTube channel? Or any interest in doing one?
I am. My knowledge of setting up, like YouTube channels is pretty basic. Especially compared to you got.
Well, it's really very simple, but we'll have an offline conversation where I'll kind of like show you what I do. But I think that'd be a neat format. I would definitely tune in. I would love to read a Trek book and then tune in and listen to a discussion between a group of people who read it. That'd be a neat
because
thing.
I guess Twitter, following a discussion on Twitter perhaps isn't always the easiest.
No, Twitter I find confusing in many ways, but I like it.
we do have so me and my friend Rick, who has his own podcast called 10 Backward. We do kind of like a podcast version of the Twitter discussion about the book. So me and him discuss the book and just follow on some of the discussions we had on Twitter with people. And that's on his website, which I believe is lowerdecksradio.co.uk. We've done 2 podcasts for 2 of the books that we've read so far. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
But we haven't TNG books yet. We've done DS9, Discovery, TOS, and Voyager at the moment.
I recommend
We
your
haven't done any-
first TNG book be Vendetta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the one I recommend.
I don't know a huge amount, but I there's one called, I think, is it Q Squared? That seems to be a
Q
popular.
Square. Yeah, I haven't actually read that one, but the Doctor Humbert, my friend who comes on here, also sometimes has read that one too. So very
Okay.
cool. All right, so
I'll note that down.
The Trek Book Club, and you heard it here first. There might be a YouTube or another podcast coming out soon with more discussions.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It's a great idea. I'm going to check it out even more. And I unfortunately have a mountain of books on the backlog. Lately, I haven't been reading, and I find that horrific because I love to read. But I will definitely see what your next book is and try to hop onto that one there.
So at the moment we're reading, it was a two-parter, a Voyager two-parter. It was the relaunch series. So it takes place immediately after the TV series. So when Voyager gets home, and it's really good. So we've read the first one, which was Homecoming, and now we're reading the follow-up to that, which is called The Farther Shore. And if you didn't love the ending to Voyager, you might appreciate these books.
Okay.
It's kind of like the ending that we didn't see. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, definitely will. Let's see. Any other notes, gentlemen, for this episode?
I have a few.
Yeah, I have a few.
Let's go. Let's hear them.
Well, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to, well, it's kind of linked to what I think you were saying before about if other species that had encountered the Paxons. I was thinking about other captains. Would other captains have had the same? Because Picard's very diplomatic and he negotiates with them. Would Cisco have reacted the same way if his ship was threatened? Would Janeway? Would Archer? Would Georgiou? Or Lorca? I'm pretty sure Lorca wouldn't react the same way.
I think it's safe to say that if you have a good crew, that like more or less the same outcome would have occurred. However, what makes it special for this particular instance is that Data is present. I think Data is that factor because the Paxons couldn't understand his technology and they couldn't, wipe his memory and all that stuff. I think with everyone else, I think the Paxons, they've been successful so far because they've remained xenophobic. So like, let's say Cisco and company would have come into this scenario. I think Odo would have been the character that like they didn't understand his physiology, and then Odo would have had to have like somehow assist the crew in coming about the solution. On Voyager, I think Dr. Zimmerman could have been that character as well. So I do think that like shows the scenario would have been the same. Now when we get to Captain Kirk, I don't know so much because like
Captain Kirk would not have investigated. He would have just moved on.
Just he would have moved on. Yeah,
there's an episode where they literally go back in time, and then all he does is he hits reverse, and then they get back to their correct timeline, and boom, it's fine. Whatever. I mean, they don't care about any of that. It's like, just move on,
And
we
then
have a mission.
And then as far as Lorca goes, I think he, again, because he has like Stamets and Burnham's very by the book, it seems, I think that she would have compelled him to, and Stamets would have definitely been the character because of the mycelial network that somehow wasn't affected by the Paxton's technology. That's my guess. That's my best guess. That's a good question. Anything else you got there? You got in your notes, Sean? Anything else?
Okay, so the episode kind of revolves around how it's Data that messes the whole thing up, but I kind of feel like it's just going to happen again because Deanna is going to see herself in the mirror again and see that she's not her.
Well, presumably they would have given that account this time like so he, you know, Picard's like, think of the first time as like a run through or a rehearsal, right? So like they collected all this data of what went wrong. So I imagine that they would say, oh, and by the way, Counselor Troy freaked out because when she looked in the mirror she didn't see herself, right? And the Paxtons
But
would
how do
probably
you
like,
fix that?
oh, we understand, we will erase the engrammatic residue of our being and possession from her as well, and then, you know,
Fair
something
enough.
like that. Yeah. Like those engrammatic
Maybe.
impressions, right? You gotta get rid of those engrammatic impressions, and then the next time around when she looks in the mirror she just sees her pretty self. So I think that, like, as far as that's concerned, like round 2, although a probe is launched, so
But
if anywhere down the line,
in
if anywhere down the line, like someone has to look at those probe logs, they're gonna see that it was like,
but for
you know,
some reason in the second loop, Picard dismisses the probe and doesn't care about it.
I
Yeah.
think
The first
suspect
time he's like, oh, why is it different? The second time he's like, oh, just launch a probe. Come on, let's get out of here.
to be fair, and to, like, you know, I gave you that explanation about what could happen with Troy, but also to be fair, like the human mind is a mystery, and I can't imagine that the Paxtons like have conquered its total workings or whatever. And I wonder if like the effect didn't have a residual feeling left behind in Picard. Like maybe something told him, like, you know, something just like, because it's very similar to the first time it happened. So like a deja vu might have occurred or something, that like, because he just kind of hesitates for a second in it. And so I wonder if it wasn't like, you know, that him going, better think twice, you know, like that's my
because he does think about it. He does have that moment of hesitation, or that moment where he's kind of thinking about the situation, and then comes to the conclusion that he doesn't care.
Right. He comes to the Kirk conclusion.
Let's move on.
Let's just keep going. Make it so. Number 1.
Yeah, there is one thing that this is just like a general TNG kind of corny problem. It's that Worf never wins any fights. And I mean, okay, when I started watching Discovery and the Kelvin timeline, I thought there's too much action and fighting and violence. But I think there is a balance that can be achieved, and I mean, building off that, I would have maybe liked at least a scuffle to go on between Deanna possessed and Worf, because I understand what they're trying to show. They're trying to show that he, you know, she just brushes him off as if he were nothing. But it would have been interesting and a little more maybe dynamic to have a bit of a fight. I'm not saying
really,
like
I hear what you're saying, but like that scene was really weird too, because there was like no audio except for like, I don't know, it just seemed like the way she grabbed, the angle at which she grabbed him was, and then she just kind of throws him.
It's kind of like, oh yeah, we have to do the wrist thing, so just grab his wrist and throw him away.
Like let's just grab.
Like, okay, let's do that. But it would have been interesting to have more like a fight where he actually, so he jumps over because he always jumps over. But then this time, like, he jumps over and he tackles her or something, and then they try to get into this fight, but it turns out like she pushes him away because she's stronger. She's like,
right,
impudent creature, and then throws his wrist away or something.
Maybe he tries to grab her. You're right. It could have been a little bit more, you know, intense. Like she maybe like grabs him, and then he uses his other hand to like backhand slap her, but it doesn't even affect her, and then he's like, "What are you?" And then then she throws him, like, you know, that
pushes him to the ground or something. I don't know. I'm not all for violence, and I appreciate the way that Star Trek in general deals with situations, you know, with diplomacy. But I think that it does add
drama,
a certain I mean, it adds a certain movement to an episode. To have, you know, these little fight scenes rather than just go away.
In the earlier scene when Counselor Troy is feeling dizzy and Worf escorts her back to her quarters before she looks in the mirror and all that stuff, I did like that the way they were walking arm in arm, because it kind of foreshadows unintentionally, I'm sure, because I don't know if they had figured this out at this point, how like later on Troy and Worf get into a relationship. Which I don't know, I kind of like that. What did you guys think, since we're not bound to just this episode with our discussion, what did you guys think of that when Star Trek Next Generation kind of threw that in our faces? They were like Worf and Troy and Riker like all along, and they have this background and the Imzadi thing and stuff like that. Then all of a sudden she's dating Worf, and you know, they're having a romantic relationship. Like, how did that make you feel? I'm curious.
Can't say I'm overly fond of it. It's not the worst relationship in Star Trek. That one would go to in 7.
Oh wow, I got to see that. But I was really deeply like, even though I like Worf as a character, I was just like, I thought that like Counselor Troy had somehow given up on her love of Riker, you know, and like it was just kind of like really sad. So yeah, I didn't like it either. But I did think it was weird how they just kind of like, I don't remember like the specifics, but I just remember it being really weird how like then all of a sudden, you know, we go from that to the movies where they don't explain. I don't think they ever explained that Worf and Troy broke up or anything like that. Like, it's just now she's back with Riker. So it was kind of like
from what someone once explained to me that what Gene Roddenberry and the production team were trying to do is show a more modern type of relationship. Which right. I mean, to each their own, but I mean, I'm kind of in a situation where the way my mind works is you're in a relationship or you're not. And then, I mean, I suppose you can define the parameters of that relationship with the person that you're with, but there doesn't seem to be much parameters defined when it comes to Riker. That just kirks every chick he sees. And then so yeah, Deanna gets together with Worf, and then it just moves on, and then
and she certainly has her, and there's certainly Riker and Troy are not even technically dating or together at this point, or even before this. So like, it certainly makes sense that they'd be seeing close people
at all times, because there are episodes where they're not technically together, but every time that she feels very bad or something's going on with her, he's very close and very tactile, and they have really a very close relationship throughout the entire series.
It's very soap operatic in that way, because you see a lot of this kind of thing on soap operas where you know that there's like these two characters that are perfect for each other, but it takes them like a long time to kind of get together, and they have to go on their own journeys and stuff like that. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's true. Well, I don't know if I have any. Let me check my notes, see if there's anything that I wrote down that we didn't actually talk about already. No, that's it. I think we covered all the same things. So were there any Easter eggs or anything like that worth note in this episode that you noticed?
Oh, are you saying this because I talked about the Z particles in our previous discussion?
Yeah, it's true.
No, I looked up all the planet names and what have you, and I think everything was kind of just like a one-off thing. We don't have any deep cuts. The deepest cut would be the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Right.
Kind of paraphrasing there, because it's not exactly that, is it? But
the T-Tauri systems are actually real star systems, like, so that was kind of a cool thing. Well, there's a lot of real science in Star Trek.
But yeah, they do that. They do that a lot, don't they? But I even thought maybe the planet because Geordi says this planet was a planet that we've already seen, and I thought, oh, maybe this is a planet that we've actually seen in TNG.
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't.
It was just
that would have been too.
Meaning like they've known about it.
Yeah.
It is kind of neat now that we're like mapping all these exoplanets. Star Trek Discovery has the opportunity to actually depict our planets that they visit more accurately than TNG or any other series could have done, because when like, at least when Next Generation was on, I think like learning about other planets, like it was just at that time, if I remember correctly, like it was still we assumed that there were other planets out there, but we had no way of like seeing them or measuring their, you know, composition or like what kind of atmospheres they had or whatnot. But now in our current time, which is actually pretty extraordinary, it's like what, only like 30 years since TNG aired, right? So 30 years later, we know like really exquisite kind of like details about exoplanets in other star systems. And some of those things are things like they know that there are like other planets that have similar compositions to like what Earth does and this and that. So like I like that, and I hope Star Trek Discovery kind of like is doing this as we explore more planets in Star Trek Discovery, like that we actually visit an exoplanet that NASA has mapped and discovered and things like that. So I think that's pretty cool. And then one day humans will actually go to that planet and it'll be nothing like what we imagined whatsoever. I guess this is the point in the show where we give it the episode rating. So on a scale from 1 to 10, do we make Rob go first, Sean?
I think we do.
Yeah, okay, so Rob, you get to go first.
I gave it 6.
Nice. So it's pretty solid.
Yeah, solid, but not, you know, not the best, not the worst. It's okay.
All right, Sean, you go next. I'll do the Gary thing and go last this time.
Okay. I was actually going to give it a 5.5.
What do you like? Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
You don't have to.
No, it's not so much a bland episode or an uninteresting episode, because there is intrigue, and I mean, you are interested in it. It's just ultimately, it doesn't deliver everything that I want it to deliver in the best way possible. I think it's kind of that's how I would summarize it.
Yeah.
So 5.5 is higher than just an average 5.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, it's not a great episode, isn't it?
Right. This is definitely not one of those episodes that like I could name off the top of my head as like one of my favorite episodes. So I agree with you. I'm gonna give this episode a 6. Just because what I did like about what took it that much over the threshold of just in the middle for me was just all the character interactions, the character development, like the caper, the mystery. I did like that there was like this kind of like you know, theme throughout the whole episode, and they kind of stuck through it where they introduced us in the teaser where Picard's like, humans just can't resist a mystery, and that's a very true statement. And so it got me thinking about that and, you know, human nature and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's not an episode that I would like just think of off the top of my head. It's like an interesting curiosity along the journey.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. There are episodes that you would go back and watch alone because they stand out to you. There are episodes that you don't want to see ever again, like the Royale. And there are episodes that, like this one, you would rewatch just if you're kind of going through the whole series once again.
Totally agree.
And
yeah.
That's where it stands.
Yeah. Or if it's on TV, I'll leave it on. Like I'll watch it, you know, like exactly. Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. Well, for our discussion for this episode of Starfleet Boy, I think because you were so close to a 6, Sean, the overall rating is going to be a 5.9 on this one. Two 6s. I do this dodgy math, Rob, so it's like it doesn't really make sense. But it's arbitrary. Make it so. Number 6. It was a pleasure having you on. Please, everyone, go follow Rob on Twitter, and we go on again anytime you'd like to come on. And I know you're particularly keen on when we finally get to Voyager on these discussions in like 3 years.
Yeah,
It's taken like 2 years to get this far, so I think it'll be at least another 2 years. Yeah, it'll be a while before I get to Voyager.
There's lots of TNG episodes coming up that I really like. So
yeah, and I like that you didn't remember this one. So I'm hoping I get you with a few more of those where you're just like, whoa, I didn't really remember this one. I think that's a delightful.
I'm saying this. I'm going to say this on air, which is insane, but chances are by the time we get to Voyager and we're still having these discussions, I might have a kid.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have like a baby like sitting on my lap as we talk about this. That would be insane. Yeah.
Yeah, same.
It'll be an interesting chronicle of all of our lives. Like, and long after many of us are dead, because YouTube's gonna live forever. Your kids, your great grandchildren, Sean, will be able to go online and watch Trek on the Tube, and then they'll hear you mention Starfleet Boy, and they'll be like, "What's that?" And then they'll go over and be like, "Great grandpa was on this other show. Holy crap!"
All of them will be like, "Oh my god, the cringe! Don't show me this. Look at this nerdy dweeb talking about Star Trek. Come on."
You never know. Your child may take up the mantle, and then you'll have Trek on the Tube, the next generation.
Ooh. with the animated tube.
Anyways, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. It was a real pleasure, and live long and prosper, and I'll see you next time.